Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Today, we're very excited to sit down with Todd Harrison, spend some time talking through what is evolving in the world of cannabis. If you're out there, one, thanks for joining. I've already seen some comments in the comments already, which is great. But if you have questions as we're going along, you're always welcome to throw them in the chat. I do think that is one of the most exciting parts of doing these lives is being able to connect you directly with people who've got a view and have some insight into different areas of the market. So for now, we're going to be continuing the cannabis conversation with Todd. But I think that's where we are so far. So Todd, how is this week has blown by for me. I'm actually out in Tennessee right now for a conference with Nasdaq Dorsey Wright. So it feels like the week has totally blurred by, but how's your week going so far?
It was going pretty well. I feel a little bit underdressed now that I'm on this podcast with you. I don't know
That
what's
is
going
true.
on, but it looks like you're about to go. It looks like you're Cinderella over there.
It does
Cinderella.
have, it does, I try to dress up for a conference, I feel like you're chatting with people, but yeah, it's still the casual conversation that we can normally have. So don't worry. You're perfectly dressed, perfectly dressed. Um,
So
so,
how's it going? It's
let's,
going okay. I think we were talking right before we went on,
mhm.
and you know, and sort of summed it up in a quick little blurb that the communications that we've heard and the price action that we've seen and the skepticism that remains, are all ingredients for powerful catalysts. Even the betting markets, if you look at them this morning, like at 17%, 25%, depending on which platform you're looking at, all support the current sentiment. But as we know, especially with expiration on Tap Friday, the robots are driving the bus until we get a headline. So, that's sort of where we are in a nutshell, and I can give you back the rest of the 28 minutes if you'd like.
No, I think that's where the setup is right now. And I think most people who are following the cannabis space kind of have that sense. We've gotten some hints, some breadcrumbs that something is going to happen and change. Again, we haven't seen that happen just quite yet, but I think, seeing that reflected in terms of prices, how things have been moving.
Well,
It
I
is
mean,
interesting.
there's people who are frustrated by the lack of communication from the White House, but if you look at, you talked about some of the signals, right, and
Mhm.
or the periphery is maybe the case, but you have, the number of op-eds from Republican senators talking to this. You have, I mean, we spoke about this, I think, on the last show, Bernie Moreno talking about the executive order and how that will facilitate. But we need a functioning government. I mean, these are the nuts and guts of it. Is we need the government to be open for actually, to facilitate the president's wishes. So that is, the most cannabis thing ever, right? Like we're at the doorstep of historic federal reform and the government shuts down. Like, that is par for our course, no doubt.
Mhm.
But as we know, the president, and as we've seen, the president could drop an executive order at any time. I think he did it for Columbus Day. I think he did it for cooking oil, right? He could do it for cannabis, and it'd actually be perfect to weaponize if you wanted to play politics and say we'll do it as soon as the Democrats come back from their vacation, or however one he wants to put it, right? But we'll see. The speculation, it's like everyone's tired of talking about it. I agree. It's October 15th. We got 58 trading days left in the year. It's like, how did we end up here again? We're looking at the headlines into year end, but that again in two is par for our course. So we'll see. In between here and there, we have earnings starting in a couple weeks. And if you look at the hoodie data, no great shakes there. The hemp space, there's a lot to talk about. Drinks, Hall flowers. So you take your pick. We can talk about whatever you'd like.
No, we'll go through it all, I'm sure. But yeah, I think definitely an interesting position. Obviously, the government shutdown, a bit of a slowdown for things moving along, but ultimately, it's not the end all be all to stop things. It is interesting just having flown to Nashville from DC and going through the TSA process, having Noam on the TVs when you're passing through TSA saying this is the Democrats' fault. They should hurry up and make sure that we can bring back the government again. It does feel like the tone is so focused on trying to get those wins against Democrats, trying to basically find those owns, I guess, ultimately. So I feel like cannabis, again, is a tee up on that front. So I am surprised that hasn't really come to be. I don't know if it's just that the government shutdown is kind of being framed in this way that's enough right now. I don't know.
There's no way to tell. I do get the sense that between the Charlie Kirk shooting and
Mhm.
Middle East peace accord, which, God bless, I don't have to wear the pin or wear my necklace anymore. I'm happy to have all the hostages home. So take a moment to appreciate that, and hopefully lasting peace in that region. But yeah, that's the risk, right? Is that world peace breaks out, or, your friend gets shot in the neck, or whatever else happens, right? I mean, that's sort of been, the concern, or the government, right, as the case may be. But that being said, the president of the United States putting out a video on the endocannabinoid system being the most significant health breakthrough of our lifetimes for seniors. I don't think you do that unless you are positioning to let your, HHS director study the plan for that. So, still optimistic, frustrated like everyone else, but even looking at the price action, we talked about this, I think, last week. Some of these names I was looking this morning, Village Farms up 311% year to date. You got Jushi and Vext coming in after that, I think, depending on the tick. So it's not like these names haven't started to appreciate. Canara, even though it's Canadian, up 137% year to date. But even looking at the U.S. names, Cresco up 80%, C21 115%, Curaleaf up 100%. The only one that's really down, it looks like Brown Road down 36%, but everything else, it looks like that's still trading, I should say, because not all of them are, are having a decent year so far, even despite the recent pullback. So not going to be linear, clearly, but it's not like you can't look at the price action since June and say the market hasn't been signaling that something is coming. To my initial point, like, we're hearing this. If we were still trading at $2 on the ETF, say, say a little bit more concerned, but so far it seems the setup seems to be supporting what we've been hearing, although the time remains elusive and obviously subject to change, because all of a sudden, if what we haven't really seen is how our space reacts to a real downdraft. And I feel like I wrote this on Friday that I have a lot more concern about. I wrote this Friday morning, I should say, that I have a lot more concern about the market taking a big dump than I do about whether or not the president's going to reschedule. And that still remains the case, right? I think it wasn't the China tariffs that got me concerned. It was really more the private credit arena and First Brands. And it reminded me a lot of American Home Mortgage in 2007, for those of us who are old enough to remember that. Not you. So anyway, like it's the history rhyming that got me concerned. It's not that I was expecting that kind of move on Friday, but our space, every space is going to be suspect or vulnerable if the market starts to price in some of these unknowns, right? That's just another thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's true if we see something that is much more sustained and longer, but I know we've had pullbacks where cannabis has not been as affected as kind of the broader market. I don't think that was as true on Friday, but I think we'd seen that previously in the month. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Friday was interesting because I don't think it was China, because this is a mostly insulated supply chain, right? I think Harrison, Jason, and Ziad were talking about, I believe they mentioned on a call, 95 or 94% of their supply chain is domestic. If I'm misquoting, forgive me, but it speaks to sort of the all-American industry, the pro-business, the jobs, the economic push, all of the stuff that the president and the listing, to be honest, that the president and a pro-business administration would enforce. I would say while I'm there, if you look at what's happening in Michigan with the 24% tax hike, or in California where Governor Newsom had vetoed medical cannabis deliveries, I think it becomes a little bit easier to extrapolate what cannabis under a Kamala Harris presidency would look like. So for everybody that was hoping for the other outcome, I do think paradoxically that this will prove to be more beneficial for the space. We just gotta let it happen and see what kind of language is attached when it does.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. I do hope we get some elements of communication along the way. I think that has been helpful with the cannabinoid video, all those little kind of reminders that it's on their mind, on their plate, in terms of the list that they're working through. But because I think the silence element is tough, I think, for investors in this space while we're still waiting. Again,
well, how can you not have PTSD? I mean, I was talking about it, like anybody. I was looking, it was funny, how your phone sometimes pulls up on this day. So I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago. It was on this day 4 years ago, and it was the Ojai event that we did, and it was. There were friends on there. It was like I saw a picture of like Danny Hurwitz, Andrew Toot, and Matt McGinley. I'm like, where are they now? It was 4 years ago. I still talk to Andrew. He's a good friend of mine. But my point being, lots changed, right? So I don't blame people for having that, oh, here we go again into year end before the rug pull syndrome, because that's what we've been conditioned to do. Why could this be different? Because it's an administrative process versus a legislative process. But again, we need a functioning government. And to that end, I'll say yesterday afternoon, I think it was Capital Report, Capital with an O, not an A, very respected think tank or group, I should say, research group, had come out and said they expect a deal next week that, on the government. So we'll see. Hoping that your government could function, I think is a pretty low bar. But seeing how our government functions all these years, I can understand why it's broken.
Yeah, we've been limboing under that low bar, I think, for a while now. But hopefully, again, we cross it and pull up. I did want to mention, because obviously you had talked about the space has changed an immense amount in the past couple of years. And I think for the investors that have been in it, like you and I have, and as well as I'm guessing people watching, I do think there's an element where new investors are starting to, peek around or at least get access. I wanted to get your take and touch base on the Robinhood side of things for Glasshouse. That feels interesting. Seems like it's a big deal to access. Again, it's like 25 million accounts and kind of get easier access for investors. Wanted to get sort of your high level thoughts on it. And I've seen mixed views in terms of some people saying this is the most important thing, and some people saying it's a nothing burger. I'm sort of in the closer to it's important, but curious what you think.
I think it's going to be a lot like the TSX listing, insofar that when there is that trigger, you're going to have a lot more accessibility to that. So you've expanded your TAM without having to invest in another geography, like intellectually. So it is a positive, but you need to, people need that trigger, right? I don't think anybody just walking along is going to just, stumble upon Glasshouse unless they're focused on what's happening in the space. I hope they do. We own it. I've said it actually. I'm wearing my Glasshouse sweatshirt today. But this was Cohodes, I think, had his fingers all over this. But this, I'll tell you, and we spoke, this is a good opportunity to talk about it, but we talked on the show after the raid that we had sort of reduced exposure and taken a little bit more cautious approach. But subsequent to the raid, I think everything they've done has been pretty high level in terms of response. It's not like the government's going to come out with an all clear, but I personally don't feel like there's another shoe that's going to drop there. I think that if there were any violations with their staff as opposed to third-party laborers, I feel like anything that might have been there is primed and proper now. So you still have the low-cost producer to the world one day or to California today. So you have that optionality. But to your point, I think when people want to buy the space, that's where we'll see the value of the Robinhood accessibility. I know that a lot of these competitors have said, hey, how did you do that? And I tried to open them up, and I said, how'd you do that? He said, I'm not telling you. I said, okay, fair enough. But yeah, that's okay. Like he's fighting the good fight. I know he ruffles a few feathers, a lot of feathers. I've known him 30 plus years. He has one way of doing business, and he breaks things, and okay. But he gets results ultimately. And I feel like if he's going to break things and get results for the industry, that's something that we want to, have a little bit more shock absorbers around than, I don't know. He's a friend.
That's fair. I'm just curious more in terms of like trend, because I think obviously that would be a benefit for a single company. But I know I'd seen after the news broke, a lot of calls to say, when will X stock be available on, the platform as well? I think anything that makes it easier to drive money in seems like a net positive. We'll be curious to see if others, kind of similar to the TSX listing, kind of move, not quite in lockstep, but try to be able to capture the same thing. I imagine just making it easier is because even though the people can access cannabis stocks now, on
No, but
different platforms?
I think that's a fair response. When there's a reason,
Oh
you know,
gosh.
we'll see the value. But until then, it becomes a nothing burger. But
Okay.
when there's a reason, you'll see the value. And the chart, by the way, if you're watching it, I mean, if it could pop through here, it's going to take out, I guess the invasion. Is that what it's called? The whatever it was, when they were when they were raided.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we're right back there at those levels, right under 8.5, 9. We'll see what happens. I'm a big fan of Graham and what they're doing over there, and I think that post raid and their reaction to it, there's a lot to be said for that.
Totally fair. I'm just curious if it's going to be part of a trend, if it's going to help, move in
I
more
think
capital.
it will.
That's my question.
And we talked last week. One of the things that
Broadly.
surprised me in a lot of these conversations that we've had more recently was the interpretation that Schedule 3 is going to be enough for to change the financial machination, the custody, the uplisting, and all that jazz. And I've always been under the impression that we need SAFE also, and we may need something to that extent, but reminded of the fact that that listing protocols and custody protocols are a compliance issue, not a law. So it's up to the banks. As we saw them shut down, custody systematically, they can reopen it. And I think we're seeing more signs of that, right? To your point, I think was the original point of your question. This is another sign. We saw, I think it was Pink, the fund, is accumulating the space. Like that's another sign. You saw Steve Eisman from The Big Short out there, talking about how he, had a thought on, on a very out of favor and out of, mainstream idea. I mean, he named Cannabis, right? And it's Glass House he owns, but it doesn't. These are all breadcrumbs. But to the earlier point, as we sit here, we're at the mercy of the algos into expiration, and it's the beatings will continue until morale improves in the short term. But zooming out, you're saying, okay, like we've gone from here in the summer to here by the end of the summer, and then we kind of took a fresh assessment, and now we're going to see what year end brings. And I think that's we're in the game. We have a president who said that he's going to do something. We'll see what happens from here.
Nope, I think that perfectly sums it up. Yeah, and I think great point. I was going to talk about the Pink edition. I think that's a really interesting sign. I think also through the healthcare lens of it all makes sense and ties in very well. I think on the cannabis as a medicine element that's been echoed.
Plant-based medicine is going to be. It's not going to be. It already is a thing.
It is.
But if you ever go back, if you ever want to really get pissed off, you go back and you just type Rockefeller petroleum medicine, and you see how he cornered the market, the American medical, universe through petroleum-based medical products. And say what you will, a sign of the times. It was what it was, but plant-based medicine has always been a thing. It's not like we're suddenly discovering it, but we're now better able to quantify it, and that gets us excited about 3.0 and what happens in the next phase. But before we get to 3.0 and the biotech pathway, which we're excited about working with companies like Indira and there's a few others, 2.0 still hasn't unpacked, right, which is USCPG. And to that end, I was at a Hall of Flowers last Wednesday at this time, as a matter of fact. I went with Dave Vautrin, who just recently, I should say, took over as CEO of Fluent. Fluent, as you may or may not know, has an exclusive deal with Alien Labs to bring their genetics to New York, which selfishly I'm very excited about. Had an opportunity to sample. Not today, despite the sip. But I'm not going to sample it, since last week, and in a very high bar, was not disappointed. But Fluent's interesting. Dave is a very interesting guy. I wrote this on my recap. I was sort of walking into Hall of Flowers thinking there was going to be all that. And I met up with Dave, and as we're walking the aisles, every couple of minutes, somebody's grabbing him to hug him and grabbing him. And it was like funny at first because I'm like, thinking this is, this is what you get. But by the second aisle, I was like annoyed, to be honest, that we couldn't even move because so many people wanted to come up and hug him and thank him. And he's been, I think it speaks volumes about the type of person he is. And I'll say also he told me, and this is public, so I don't think breaching, I hope I'm not breaching anything, but when he was awarded equity to come in as CEO, he gifted that to his management team and then went into the open market and bought a substantial amount of equity with his personal money. And I was like, that's not something you see every day. So they have New York and Alien Labs, they have Florida, and they have a Texas license, which I think is going to become increasingly valuable as Schedule 3 approaches, because they're one of the states that is tied, their CSA is tied to the federal CSA, like 50, I think most of the states have that. But it was interesting to see at Hall of Flowers all the brands, all the West Coast brands that are migrating east. And it just was, it reinforced a few things, like where the value proposition is going to lie in the future on the brand side of the equation. We knew that. We're seeing that also manifest in beverages, right? And THC side. We'll talk about that, Michigan, in a second. But that was really my takeaway from Hall of Flowers, was all of these West Coast brands trying to get a foothold. And there were a few East Coast brands, New York brands, I should say, that surprised me, even if I can't pronounce them fully, that they were actually much better quality than I had expected to see from a New York brand. So, this is a market that is exciting finally after 5 years. Has it been 4 years? It's been some time since we've been online. Feels that long anyway. And it's been asked backward in terms of how New York rolled out, but you're finally starting to see the growth. Finally starting to see the traction, and you're starting to see the brands take root, which all of which makes intuitive sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. In terms of the conversations that you had when you were at Hall of Flowers, anything different than what kind of has been talked about in the space for a while in terms of where we're heading? Any differing views in terms of kind of the current landscape, or is everyone kind of thinking that things are moving along in the same way?
I mean, it was a lot more optimistic than, say, like a Benzinga, where although Benzinga was pretty optimistic for Benzinga, but there you had more industry types. This was more brands and the New York market isolated, and there was a lot of optimism around New York. The New York operators that were there were very happy, at least the ones I spoke with. I know that for everyone that made it there, there's probably 9 who couldn't afford a booth, but the ones that made it there, I thought were, some of which were impressive. There was some that was like, what is this? What are you doing? But thematically, it was the invasion of the West Coast brands, and Alien, I think, stood out. I mean, in terms of the booths and the activity, there was like 3 deep at Alien, so that was interesting. But I think that's all going to unpack. We need a regulatory construct that makes sense. I wrote a piece on the Target News on Monday, and I got all this pushback from the hemp people, like, why aren't you more excited? And I'm like, because this is, another brick in the wall, so to speak. And then I got others from a group saying, why are you hating on hemp? I said, I'm not hating on hemp. I just want there to be, one rule, one plant, right? And for all of the hemp people who said, no, this is how you do it. We just got to change the farm bill and change the definition, and we'll pull cannabis into our world. Like, okay, do it. Go ahead. Right? Like, it's not like we spent the last 5 years not trying to jump the shark. It's just that, after the shark eats you, 3/4 of your body, you learn to swim around the shark. Right? And that's where we are. We're swimming around the shark to get, hopefully, to a buoy that's called Schedule 3. And then from there, we'll heal and, have hopefully the wherewithal to swim to shore, which is where we all want to be, which is descheduling and letting the states decide. But it's not an us versus them. I think if you're really that scared about regulations, you probably shouldn't be selling products to people in the first place.
Yes, I think that's true. I think it's hard for hemp. There can be people who are trying to self-regulate, have things in place to try to keep people safe, try to keep it out of the hands of kids. But I think the bad actors in the space, it kind of paints it, unfortunately, with a bad brush.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that, let's not, how can I say this? What we've seen, I just got off the phone with Derek Maltz before this call. He was calling me to talk about the Steve Robinson video that we posted. Or I talked about I was trying to make a play on Robinson's Crusoe and say Robinson's Crusade, but I think I'm the only one who might have gotten that, but nonetheless, like he was talking about how China and Derek was going on and, you know, naming some of these poisons that China, he's like, if you're China, like, you know, they did it with COVID and, you know, not my words. And now you got, let's see, what he said here, meth, fentanyl, carfentanil, money laundering, xylazine, nitazine, metallizine, protanazine, all these zines. There's like 7 zines.
Hard to pronounce.
Tainted illegal. He said why? He said the goal of destabilizing America with poisonous substances, just like they did, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, like that's hurting all of the good actors. It's hurting the good actors in hemp. It's hurting the good actors in cannabis, and it's crushing prices, and it's poisoning our streets. So, you know, the enemy of the enemy is my friend, right? Derek, I've known for a long time. He caught El Chapo. Like when he was named acting DEA administrator, like it's like, okay, let's shift the narrative from DEA deep state to the enemy of the enemy is my friend. Like this is, we want this garbage out of the streets, right? And what I've been working with Derek on is the understanding that, well, if you take this away, people are going to look for an alternative. If you can't provide a safe legal alternative, then they're going to go back to the illicit market. And so I feel like that conversation has come full circle. And I feel like all of these Venezuelan boat bombings and such are paving the way to, you know, a regulated market, letting the states decide. It makes no sense with more than half the U.S. population in legal states to have it, you know, scheduled. I'm preaching to the pulpit.
Yeah, no, 1,000%. I do feel like that those sentiments and those views have been echoed through the administration. And I imagine a good amount of that has been informed by the advocates, by the industry in terms of trying to communicate that and kind of aligning with a lot of their goals and views, I think, ultimately. In terms of like communicating the urgency and the need to get it resolved quickly so people can kind of get off of a riskier spread of things into that more regulated channel. Have those conversations changed at all? It's the same thing. Again, I know they're busy. I know the government shut down. I know they've got a ton of other things on their plate, but are those conversations still happening? Anything different?
Yeah, I don't want, you know, I mentioned that the marching orders to, you know, shut the hell up and not say anything that's going to create any more self-inflicted wounds because as we've seen with the leak, but yes, the conversations have continued. Yes, there is a much more engaged administration versus last year. Versus, you know, the last administration. But, you know, it's a tricky position for investors, right? Because it's a binary, you know, it used to be you would have a phase 3 trial. This is a schedule 3 trial, right? It's a binary outcome where if it's good, we're going to see multiples to the upside. If it's bad, we're going to see, you know, more pain, more of the same, I guess. But how you're positioned into that is really a function of your risk profile, right? So if you want to say, okay, best in breed balance sheet among the MSOs, you say Green Thumb. I'd say best in breed model among, like, writ large, in my view, it's Village Farms, right? Okay, like saying that best model like US, okay, Glass House has the best weed at the cheapest price, but you know, as long as there's no shoes, like, okay, there's that. But from there, you're like, what has the most torque? And that's where you have to be careful. You're not, they're not all created equal. Like, for instance, Terracin and Verano, I think, have a lot of torque, but I think they're going to be positioned well no matter what happens. Jason, you know, has been deep, not wide for so long. Jason and Ziad, I should say, you know, I think they have the ability to go wide at stressed prices and, you know, and you know, grow that way. But on the periphery, you know, you have names like Ascend, you have names like C21. These are all names we're involved with. You know, I'm on the board of C21. Just tickers, not advice. You know, we mentioned Fluent, right? It's trading at 7 cents, right? I'm talking on a percentage move, right? You have more risk if you don't see federal reform, but with federal reform, these names on a percentage basis are going to see a lot more torque, right? Marimed, Vexed, right? As I pulled up my thing today, I was like looking year to date, looking at some of these names that move that have decent fundamentals, right? So those are some of the underlying names, Marimed, you know, like that are going to, on a percentage basis, we think move a lot more. But obviously some of the staples, if you can call them that, in this world with the tax provisions, are going to move less because they're perceived to be safer, right? Whether that's Trulieve or TI or and Cresco is probably somewhere in between. But then you have the listed names, and this is where because everyone's going to run to like what has liquidity as opposed to what is actually going to benefit, right? And we talk about Village, right? It's High Tide, Sundial. These are all good fundamental names right now. Canada seems to be upticking. Prices seem to be doing better. Yes, we have the German telehealth, decision, which impacts on the margin, but doesn't really change the long-term story of global cannabis, in my view. So that's all, sort of playing itself out. But those names that are listed that people can reach and grab and trade and move and sell when they want to, because there's enough liquidity. We saw how much Tilray traded in Canada. Like we owned some Tilray calls. We sold half into that move because it was like, but we still have half because we want something for the decision. And then, because we think the decision is coming. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. And, you and I will sit here next year saying what went wrong. But, trying to think positive and attract, feed the good wolf, keep the bad wolf at bay, and, stay the course, because, we didn't come this far to come this far.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the conversations evolving past whatever we get, whether it's rescheduling, whether it's descheduling. I've heard that's kind of re-entering the conversation. Wherever we land, that moves us forward. Curious to talk through implications for the companies, for the industry, for investors, all of that. Hopefully, I do think.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to cut you off, especially when
No.
you dressed up for the interview. I think it also depends on what the language is, right, surrounding it, right? So if he speaks to capital markets, if they speaks to, like we have to see, right? Because we know what he talked about on the campaign trail, right? It was very specific, right? He said four things. He said Schedule 3, states' rights, clemencies, and banking. Right. And, that's where I go back to the hemp guys and say, listen, like if we can change a couple words in the farm bill, I don't know if that's possible, but I guess it's possible. Like, okay, let's do that and leave it to the states. Right. It would solve a lot of problems, but just let's even the playing field and unite under the, understanding that we do have a common enemy, right? The illicit market, the Chinese crime rings and the Mexican cartels that are poisoning our children. Like, let's at least agree on that as a baseline, so that we can move forward and start to let this plant do what it was designed to do, which is help heal society, not divide it.
Perfect. All right, that's fantastic. I know we're over on time a little bit slightly, so just final thing is sort of looking ahead, looking forward. I know we're coming up on earnings. I know we have the federal kind of landscape and setup as it is, but in terms of the companies, the earnings, overall trends, anything you're looking for from that? I know, again, people are not super dialed into every single element of the fundamentals, but anything high level you're looking at.
I'm looking for a mulligan.
Looking for a what?
A mulligan. I don't even golf.
All right.
I'm hoping that we get some sort of federal news. I don't think earnings are going to be all that. How could they be, right? Yeah, the price compression hasn't abated. You still have a lot of this garbage on the streets, and looking at the hoodie data, it just doesn't. There's not going to be any upside surprises. I think it just is an opportunity to see which companies are managing. And using this as an opportunity to train and to get healthier and lean and mean, so that when the cuffs come off, they can go out there and operate. Because I have a feeling that when the cuffs come off and you're able to go out there and operate on an even playing field, the field's going to be very muddy, and there's going to be a lot of wind. And we've been saying it. I think I wrote it in 2012, which is now 13 years ago.
That's crazy.
That the modern prohibition, I said, what did I say? I can't even remember it. That the Great Depression caused the first prohibition to end, and the next Great Depression will cause the modern prohibition of cannabis to end. And I'm hoping I'm wrong, but there's a lot of signs that would suggest, just as there are signs that would suggest that cannabis is about to be like there's enough signs out there that say that there's some cracks in the foundation. But we'll see. This is a hard juncture of the market and of time, like of humanity, politics, markets, society. So, just got to go through it to get through it, to get to it.
I think that's true. Do it together. And if it's something that you believe in terms of the long term, I know timing can be tough. It's one to keep an eye on and watch. But appreciate, again, you spending some time chatting through kind of where we are, what could be ahead, and spending the time together as well. I see some great comments, but mainly just comments, no questions. So appreciate everyone who joined us today. If you have comments, questions on the next one, you're always welcome to bring them. So just a good reminder, it's a great way to connect. But with all that said, I'll let you go. Todd, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And catch you guys next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.